Dear guests, let us welcome on stage Mr. David Butcher, partner in the technology sector team and leader of BDO's focus on the blockchain and crypto space at BDO United Kingdom. Mr. David Butcher.
Afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak to you today. The people at BLOCKWALKS and our colleagues here at BDO. We've heard a lot of what's going on in the European space in deployment of blockchain over the course of the day, and the next few minutes I'm just going to talk to you about where we are in the UK public sector at the moment and the deployment of blockchain and some of the possible use cases that are out there for us. So I think, but before we get into some of those use cases, I think it's important just to set the scene as to where the government is in the UK at the moment. I think it's probably over the last 2-3 years, consistent to where we heard earlier about the position in the EU. They've been really upskilling themselves and understanding where blockchain might be useful as a solution in the public sector. And there's been several reports from think tanks such as Reform, one of the lobbying gobbies in the UK, and actually the House of Lords issued a report, I think 2017, about the benefits of using distributed ledger technology in the public sector. So over those last 2 years, they've really been actively listening to those reports and thinking about what could we be doing about it. And actually now, I think they've changed their stance, and we're now in what they're coining the active investigation mode. And the reason for that is, I think you've got it up on there, they've come out with some figures around potentially £8 billion worth of cost savings through the deployment of blockchain and other technologies in the UK public sector, which is absolutely massive, and that's really got their attention at the moment. So that's all the positive piece. Unfortunately, I couldn't say anything, stand up here and not mention the third point on there. Unfortunately, whilst everything positive we just talked about, Brexit has been happening over the last 2 years, which has kind of distracted most of the UK government, if we're honest. And it's meant that some of the projects in the space have been put on the back burner because areas such as Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, that deals with all of the tax requirements in the UK, has been very much focused on how do we deal with a no-deal Brexit, how do we deal with a managed exit. And so they've been very much inward focused at this point in time. And it's not just the people that are at the coalface doing the work, it's there's actually a fallout in the tone at the top. So one of the key positions in the UK, the Minister for Digital and Creative Industries, who would be one of the strong proponents of deploying new technologies, is currently a vacant position in the UK government because Margot James, who was that minister, actually resigned in July this year as a result of her disagreements over how the government was attempting to exit the European Union. So there's a lot of disruption that's causing at the moment. But having said that, there's actually a lot of initiatives and a lot of activity that's happening in the UK across both the financial services sector and the governance around that, and also some of the specific areas in government. Probably one of the most successful areas is the FCA Sandbox, so the Financial Conduct Authority, which governs the financial sector in the UK, has had a sandbox environment going on now for a good few years. They're on to their 5th cohort now of fintechs that are coming through that space to help improve the efficiencies, particularly in the banking financial services sector in the UK. And a great statistic there, I think 40% so far of those fintechs that have gone through that sandbox are blockchain businesses. So there's a lot of interest at the tech scale-up and tech startup level in deploying these pilots in a really safe sandbox environment. And we've had some good successes. Probably the most notable one, a business called Nivara. They were in the sandbox, I think, in cohort 2 or 3. deploying their solution for removing the administrative burden on transfer of financial assets. And they've just raised earlier this year 20 million in their seed funding to take that to the next level and deploy that in a more of a commercial scale. The Crypto Assets Task Force, that's set up by the FCA, the Bank of England, and Her Majesty's Treasury. And whilst they're not deploying any blockchain solutions themselves, they're really lobbying the government and providing some guidance out there to the public, particularly around the developments in the crypto asset space, particularly. But then I think probably the next two on the agenda, just to talk you through, HM Land Registry and Methods Consultancy. As you've heard around some of the smart city discussions we've had earlier from Stefan and some of the others, smart cities is very much on the radar in the UK. And the land registries aspect of that is what they're calling Digital Street. And they're now in phase 2 of that project, working with Methods, blockchain consultancy business. They're currently in a pilot phase, developing a blockchain solution on the Corda platform, R3's Corda platform. Very similar, I think, based on some of the learnings that we heard from David earlier about what's happening in Sweden, and obviously everything we know about what happened with Bitfury and the Georgian Land Registry. The aim here is initial pilot to pull onto the blockchain all of the land registry records for all the property and land in a specific area of the UK. And on the basis that's successful, that will be rolled out nationally. And that will have some great efficiencies in the transactions in the property space. I can only say from a personal experience, remortgaging, let alone buying a property in the UK, is a very administrative process. And a lot of that can be addressed by the blockchain solution that these guys are coming up with here. The next area, UK export finance. And so UK export finance help finance and secure funding for UK exporters globally. And at the moment, it's a very linear process in the UK. So if you're a UK exporter, maybe a big aircraft manufacturer, for instance, and you need some financing, you go to the bank, you give them all the details, the bank does their reconciliations, they then send it to UK Export Finance for their government guarantee and funding back-to-back, basically, to the bank. They do all their reconciliations, and it comes all the way back down the line, back to the company at the other end, and then the export finance is issued. They're working with Southampton University and one of the tech teams there. Again, actually, on a Corda platform, it seems to be the blockchain platform of choice in the UK from R3. And again, they're currently building a prototype that will really remove all of that administrative burden and the constant reconciliation that goes on in that process. So 2 real live projects that are ongoing at the moment. The next area, the Ministry of Justice and Securing of Evidence. These guys are slightly behind other aspects that we've just talked through. They currently came out, a spokesperson for them announced recently that they are now actively looking at potential partners and potential solutions to help them with the securing of evidence. With the significant growth in data and therefore the associated cybercrime and technology related to that, there's a big push and a big risk from a prosecution perspective of when you're obtaining that evidence out on a case through to that being used in court. They want to remove any potential of tampering of that evidence, which means it's inadmissible in court, and therefore increasing their rates of successful prosecutions in the digital space. So earlier stages, but certainly something that's coming down the line from their perspective. Then we've got ID and money laundering compliance. Now, this was We've all heard of things that happened in Estonia, and I'm sure we'll hear about that more when in one of the next sessions around the e-identity. We've heard earlier some of the focus from the EU on this area, etc. In the UK, I think this was the specific focus of a report from the Reform think tank 2 years ago, saying that blockchain should really be deployed in this area. And actually, this picture here on the side of the screen was in that report. And currently in the UK market, whilst they're accepting that there's potential for this area is actually a lot less developed than you might think. Currently, we are on the left-hand side or right-hand side of that diagram as you look at it, where as a UK citizen, I'll have my records with all of the different government agencies, different formats of data, different types of data. They don't speak to each other particularly well. So if I'm doing my taxes, I'll have something with HMRC. If I'm doing my driving license, with DVLA, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, the opportunity here, I think, with the blockchain solution to create that sovereign identity will really take out the administrative burden. And I think this is where the UK government will see a lot of savings in this area in the coming years if they can deploy this appropriately. I think the last point probably to flag on here is there's all this really interesting stuff going on, and we've only covered a few of the examples that are going on in the UK public sector at the moment, but all this is on the backdrop of the legality of smart contracts. We've heard some of the conversations earlier today about some of the challenges that brings, particularly when you go cross-border. Actually, in the UK at the moment, the Law Society are doing some research into this specific topic. They've issued some guidance, which at the moment, quite frankly, is inconclusive, and they're still doing some work. But to give you an idea as to where we are and the backdrop that the government are working to as well, we had a round table of probably, I think, 10 to 15 managing partners of some of the largest UK law firms about 6 months ago to discuss blockchain, and one managing partner could tell me what blockchain was. So if the leaders of these firms, these law firms, don't understand what's going on, I'm not quite sure how the Law Society is going to come up with a solution on legality of smart contracts, but it's certainly on their radar, and I hope they come up with a solution soon. And look, there's many other examples that we could talk through. There's lots of pilots going on at a low scale, and I think it's a really exciting time to be in the UK in the blockchain space. So I think, I did have something on here around how the UK is following some of these global initiatives. We've covered a lot of these, and I know that Stefan mentioned Dubai there. I think personally, Dubai is a great example that we can all follow. If every government was to have a minister of AI and really drive this, the adoption of blockchain and related technologies across the globe, it would go a long way to creating those efficiencies and those cost savings. And then voting. I think we've touched on that several times over the course of the day. There's nothing of note from that respect going on in the UK, but a couple of businesses that I'm aware of that I've seen on a much smaller scale. Polly's in Montenegro and Votum in the US. They've developed 2 blockchain solutions for doing voting on a much smaller scale at the moment. If them and some of the things we heard about Zug and the voting system there, if they can come forward in the next 5 years and commercialize that to a much bigger scale, then I think that'll be a great way of bringing trust back into the public sector, which in the UK at the moment, given everything that's going on, I think that would be, the government would be remiss not to think about something like that. So that's where we are at the moment in the UK market. I think in conclusion from my perspective, the public sector is clearly ripe for disruption, and the government have openly said they're actively investigating it and they're willing to look at the solutions, particularly from blockchain and related technologies. There is lots of initiatives that have been started, but not many are at the commercially viable and large scale, which, from what I've heard today, is relatively consistent across other aspects of the EU. But I think the key for yourselves as blockchain enthusiasts and blockchain businesses is to the solutions that we come up with. I think they really need to be bespoke to the governments that we're working with. I know we've talked about cross-border transactions, and I think that will come in time. They need to be cost-effective. One of the big things for the government is obviously the cost of these, and as long as they're creating those efficiencies, that will stand us all in very good stead. Thank you very much.